Many believe that worrying is a sign of responsibility, that if they are not constantly thinking about what could go wrong, something bad will happen. They live tense, anticipating problems, repeating scenarios in their mind as if that protected them. But all they do is feed fear. I, Brian Tracy, have learned that worry solves nothing, does not prevent, does not protect, does not improve. It only consumes, drains energy, erases clarity, clouds action, and the more you worry, the less you act, because you are busy imagining everything that could fail instead of attending to what you can change. The key is not to worry more, it is to worry less and act better. Because the solution is not in repetitive thinking, it is in precise action. And that starts when you decide that your peace is more important than your fear. Because you did not come to survive under constant tension. You came to live with direction, with decision, with inner calm. And that starts when you learn to nullify worries. The first step to nullify worries is to understand with absolute clarity a truth few accept. Worrying changes nothing. I repeat because it is fundamental. Worrying changes nothing. Thinking and rethinking a problem does not solve it. Repeating in your mind what could go wrong does not prevent it. Imagining 1,000 negative scenarios does not prepare you. It paralyzes you. Worry is a mental trap, disguised as foresight. It makes you feel busy, but not productive. It gives the illusion of doing something when in reality you are only draining your vital energy. I also fell into that trap. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, my mind already running before opening my eyes, worried about what was to come, about what I did not control, about what might happen or might not. And for years I thought that was normal, that tension was part of the path. But it was not. It was slow self-destruction. I was burning from the inside without realizing it, because when your mind lives trapped in worry, you do not see clearly, you do not hear your intuition, you do not make decisions, you react. And every reaction is born from fear, not from power. The real change came when I asked myself a brutally simple question. Does this thing I worry about have a solution? If the answer was yes, then the next thing was to act. Not think more, not wait to feel ready. Act, make a call, write an email, have an uncomfortable conversation, adjust a strategy. But act, because every worry that has a solution dissolves with action. And if it has no solution, then you let it go. Not out of resignation, but out of respect for your energy, because worrying about the uncontrollable is not maturity. It is wear. It is not responsibility. It is punishment. This principle changed my life because it returned control to me. It taught me that the mind can be your best ally or your worst prison. And when you decide to think in terms of what is useful and not what is automatic, everything changes. I started classifying my thoughts as if they were objects. Does this serve a purpose? Does this bring me closer to concrete action? Can I solve this now? If the answer was no, I let it pass, wrote it down, let it go, replaced it, because I learned that letting go of a thought is also a form of discipline. Not everything that appears in your mind deserves your attention. Not every thought deserves to be fed. And here is the key. Your mind will not calm itself. It will not stop worrying magically. You have to train it, like a muscle, like a tool. You have to teach it to let go of what it cannot change and to focus on what it can build. Because a mind trained in useful thinking is a mind at peace. And from that peace you make better decisions, communicate better, work with more focus, live with more presence, not because there are no problems, but because you no longer wear yourself out on what does not add up. So if today you are trapped in the wheel of worries, pause, breathe, write, ask yourself, does this have a solution? If it does, act. If it does not, let go. And if you still do not know, then wait without anxiety, because not everything is answered today, but you can choose how to think today. And that choice, though it may seem small, is the start of a freer mind, a lighter life, a stronger present. Because every time you choose not to worry, you are choosing to trust. And to trust is not to close your eyes. It is to open your heart and act from calm, from strength, from your internal power. And that power has always been in you. You only need to decide to use it. The second step to nullify worries is to learn to identify the real origin of fear, because every worry has a deeper root. It is not the problem itself that unsettles you. It is what that problem represents to you. You are not worried about being late. You are worried others will judge you as irresponsible. You are not worried about the mistake. You are worried about appearing weak. You are not worried about money as such. You are worried about feeling incapable, like a failure, insufficient. And as long as you do not discover that root, your mind will keep manufacturing excuses, scenarios, and tensions about anything, because what anguishes you is not the external. It is the interpretation you make from within. When I began to study my own worries, I noticed something disturbing. No matter how many problems I solved, a new one always appeared, a different one with another disguise, but that generated the same anxiety in me, because it was not the content that mattered, it was the pattern. My mind had grown accustomed to finding something to worry about, because that way it felt useful. That way it felt alert. It was doing something, but what it was really doing was protecting me from a more uncomfortable sensation, uncertainty, not knowing, not having total control. And when I understood that, everything changed. I began to look beyond the apparent problem. What am I really feeling? What am I afraid of losing? What image of myself am I trying to protect? And by answering that with brutal honesty, I discovered uncomfortable but liberating truths. I discovered that many times I worried more about how others saw me than how I felt, that I was more terrified of criticism than of failure itself, that I preferred to have constant worry over staying silent with my thoughts. Because silence is scary when you haven't made peace. This step is transformative because it forces you to stop living on the surface. It pushes you to confront your original fear, the one you learned as a child, reinforced with failures, fed with others' beliefs. And when you reach that core, worry loses strength because you are no longer running from the external. You are working on the internal. You are no longer fighting symptoms. You are healing the cause, and that requires bravery. Yes, but it also returns power to you, because when you understand what truly frightens you, you can treat it with real tools, with awareness, with compassion, with firmness. Today, every time something unsettles me, I do not stop at the surface. I ask myself, what does this awaken in me? What part of my identity feels threatened? Is it real or a reflection of an old wound? And when I find that answer, the thought softens. Tension lowers, the problem stops being gigantic, because I understood that often what worries us is not what is happening, but what we believe that means about us. And that can be changed, can be reframed, can be cleansed. Nullifying worry is not ignoring what you feel. It is going deeper. It is looking fear in the face and telling it, I see you, I understand you, but you will no longer take control, because you are not your worry, you are the one observing it. And when you learn to observe without reacting, you begin to think with clarity, to feel with maturity, and to live with lightness. And there your true freedom begins. Because you are no longer dominated by your mind, you are leading it. And that, though it may be hard at first, is worth every second of inner work, because living in peace is not a luxury, it is a decision, one you can make right now. The third step to nullify worries is to firmly anchor yourself in the present, because worry does not live in the now. It lives in the future. It is the anxiety over what could happen, over what maybe will occur, over that endless what if. And while your mind is trapped in that imaginary time, your body will be tense, your breathing short, your heart racing even though nothing is happening. That is the most destructive part of worry. It makes you suffer over events that do not yet exist, and many of them will never occur, but you are already living them as if they were real. You are paying interest on debts you do not have. I spent years tied to the future. I would sit down to work, and before writing a word I was already thinking about failure. I prepared to speak with someone, and had already imagined everything that could go wrong. I went to sleep with someone, with my body in bed, but my mind running scenarios that distressed me. And the hardest part was that I could not even enjoy the good moments, because my attention was not there. It was always on what was coming, always projected forward, always waiting for fear to be confirmed. The breaking point was an afternoon, when after having a great achievement, I could not feel joy. I was thinking about the next step, about what was missing, about whether I would be able to sustain it, and there I understood. It was not reality taking my peace away. It was my inability to inhabit the present, because the only real thing is this moment. Everything else is projections, and the more time you spend in those projections, the farther you are from yourself, from your intuition, from your strength, from your truth. Anchoring yourself in the present is not a spiritual metaphor. It is a concrete mental skill, and it is trained with breathing, with mindfulness, with conscious movements, with pause, with real listening, with writing, with decisions, made from the now, not from fear of what may come. I began to incorporate simple practices. Before starting the day, I would breathe deeply 5 times. I asked myself, what is happening right now? And I answered with facts, not thoughts. I am in this room, I am breathing, I am safe, I am here. And that small act brought my mind back, gave me perspective, returned power to me. This step is fundamental because your mind cannot be full of worry and presence at the same time. It is either in the future or in the now. And when you choose the now, everything slows down, thought organizes itself. Fear loses intensity because you are in contact with what is really happening, not with what could happen. And that is where you can act, where you can intervene, where you can choose with awareness. Today, every time I feel worry start to escalate, I do not fight it, I do not repress it. I simply bring myself to the present. I connect with what I can see, hear, touch, breathe. I repeat to myself, right now I am okay, and from there, I decide. Because power is not in controlling the future, it is in mastering the present. It is the only thing you truly have. It is the only place from where you can transform your reality. If your mind has been constantly traveling to the future, I invite you to return. You do not need to solve everything now. You only need to be here completely, because here is where life happens. Here is where you can act with firmness, feel with authenticity, think with clarity. And when you train your mind to stay here, it no longer needs to run toward the uncertain, because it's starting toward the uncertain, to trust in you in the process. In the capacity, you have to face what comes when it comes, not before, not with fear, but with total presence. And from that presence, worries are nullified because you are no longer running. You are living. The 4th step to nullify worries is to transform uncertainty into a space of opportunity. Because many people do not realize that what truly paralyzes them is not the problem itself, but the fact of not having all the answers. It deeply unsettles them not to know what will happen, not being able to anticipate the exact outcome, not having total control over the future. But that need for absolute certainty is in itself a constant source of suffering. Because real life is not a perfect equation. It is change, surprise, ambiguity. And if you do not learn to relate to uncertainty, worry will become your chronic companion. I used to fear any blank space, every decision without a guarantee, every path where I could not foresee each step. Uncertainty made me feel vulnerable, robbed my sleep, made me imagine the worst, until I understood something crucial. It is not uncertainty that destroys you. It is your resistance to it. Because if you reject it, you turn it into anguish. But if you accept it, you turn it into creative energy, into an open possibility, into fertile ground, where anything can arise, not only the bad, also the best. And that is where the mind frees itself, when you move from wanting to control everything to trusting in your ability to adapt, because that is what truly matters. Not knowing what will happen, but knowing you will know what to do when it happens. Change the focus, move from what if it goes wrong to what if I trust I can handle whatever comes. That single question repeated with conviction can put out mental fires you have been feeding for years. To train this, I began to consciously give thanks for each uncertain moment, not out of masochism, but as a way to reprogram my automatic reaction. Every time I did not know how something would resolve, I told myself, this is training, this is expansion, this is evolution. And from that focus, instead of sinking into worry, I opened myself to learn, to act with what I had, to observe without judgment. And what I found was amazing. My anxiety decreased, my creativity increased, my confidence grew because I no longer depended on everything being clear. I became clear, and you can do the same. You can stop fearing not having all the answers, because who does? No one, not the most successful, not the wisest. The only thing that sets them apart is that they learn to move it too. In the midst of fog, with firm step, even if they did not see the whole path, and every step they took illuminated the next, because that is what action does in the midst of uncertainty. It opens a path where before there was only fog. This is the moment to invite you, with total honesty, to subscribe if this message resonates with you, because this channel is not just a space to learn, it is a space to transform. And if you are here, it is because you are ready to live with less fear and more power. Leave me in the comments, what is that decision you are postponing, out of fear of not having total certainty? Write it with bravery. Putting it into words is already starting to conquer it. Remember, you did not come into the world to live on autopilot, avoiding risks, anesthetizing your mind with worries that lead nowhere. You came to grow, to test, to fail if necessary, and to try again. Because he who dares to walk without guarantees finds strengths that he who waits for certainties will never know. And when you make uncertainty your ally, you become unstoppable, because then nothing can scare you, not even not knowing, because you know you are greater than any doubt, stronger than any outcome, and freer than any fear. The fifth step to nullify worries is to change your focus from what you cannot control to what you can build, because the root of most worries lies in focusing again and again on external factors that do not depend on you. What others think, what they say, what they do, what happens with the economy, the weather, circumstances, and the more attention you give to what escapes your hands, the smaller your capacity to respond feels. Anxiety grows bigger, your identity becomes weaker, because you are looking outward for peace. When the only real peace is built from the inside out, I used to live trying to anticipate and control 1,000 things that were not in my hands. I wanted others to understand my intentions, every plan to work without flaws, everything to align so I could feel safe. But life does not work that way. There is always chaos, always unforeseen events, always something that does not fit as expected. And if your well-being depends on the world being in order, then your well-being is in the world's hands. And that is a formula for living in constant tension. True power began when I started making a daily list of the things I could control. My thoughts, my decisions, my attitude, my routine, my rest, my focus, my way of speaking, my response to obstacles, and I committed to caring for that with rigor, because I discovered that what you care for grows. What you watch over improves, what you practice strengthens. And from there, no matter what happened outside, I felt I was advancing, that I had direction, that I was not adrift, because there is always something you can do, even if you cannot do everything. This step may seem obvious, but most do not apply it, because it is more comfortable to complain about what does not depend on you than to assume what does. It is easier to say, it is the system's fault, the bosses, the partners, the countries, than to look inward and say, what can I do today to change my energy, my direction, my story? But that question is what makes the difference, because it takes you out of the victim and puts you in the author's role. And when you write your life with responsibility, worries shrink because your presence grows. So today, when something unsettles me, the first thing I do is separate what depends on me from what does not, and then I forget the latter. I let it go. I release it and focus all my energy on what I can build, on the conversation I can have, on the step I can take, on the habit I can reinforce, on the attitude I can choose. And that daily practice not only keeps me stable, it keeps me strong, because I no longer spend energy trying to move the wind. I use that energy to adjust my sails. If you are surrounded by worries, do this today. Write down everything that worries you, and next to it mark which things you can actually control. The rest, delete it, remove it from your field of attention, because what you cannot control has no right to rob your peace, and what you can control has the power to transform you, if you work on it with discipline. That is the great difference between the man who lives in anxiety and the one who lives in focus. One is waiting for everything to fall into place. The other is building from where he is. You do not need the world to change to have peace. You need to change your focus. You need to become someone so disciplined with what he can do that he no longer has time or space to feed what he cannot, because there is true freedom, not in everything going well, but in knowing that no matter what happens, you know what to do with yourself, with your thoughts, with your energy, with your life. And from there, worries lose their power over you, because you recovered yours. The sixth step to nullify worries is to rebuild your belief system, because many of the things that anguish you today do not come from the present. They come from ideas you adopted years ago without questioning them. Inherited ideas repeated, assumed as absolute truths. Beliefs like if I am not successful, I am worth less. If I do not control everything, something will go wrong. If I do not meet everyone's expectations, I am a failure. Those invisible phrases are what activate your constant worry, because they impose an impossible bar to reach. They push you to demand of yourself from fear, not from awareness. And when you live like that, any mistake, delay, or criticism becomes a threat to your identity. For a long time, my mind was full of those toxic ideas, automatic thoughts that said, you cannot fail, you must be prepared for everything. If you don't do it perfectly, no one will respect you. And I believed that was having high standards. But in reality, it was slavery disguised as discipline, anxiety disguised as ambition, because when your beliefs are contaminated, your whole way of living becomes tense, rigid, heavy. And the worst part is you don't even know why. You just feel the pressure, the fear, the wear, and you normalize it. The change started when I stopped to literally write down all the phrases I repeated to myself in moments of stress, and upon reading them I realized something shocking. Most were not mine. They were ideas I heard from others, absorbed in childhood, taught by culture, reinforced by teachers, bosses, even people who loved me, but were just as defeated. And there I understood. If those ideas entered without a filter, they can also leave. They can also be replaced by new beliefs that are fairer, more human, more useful. I began to rebuild that system from scratch, to repeat phrases that truly strengthened me. I can learn from every mistake. I do not need to be perfect to be valuable. What I do not control does not define me. My peace does not depend on results, but on how I walk the process. And at first, I did not fully believe it, of course, but with repetition, with evidence, with small internal victories, my mind began to adapt, because the brain learns by repetition, not by logic. If you repeat something with conviction long enough, it becomes your new truth, and from there, worry no longer has anything to cling to. This step is vital, because your mind is built on invisible foundations. If those foundations are weak, everything you build on top will wobble. But if you reinforce them with clear, powerful ideas chosen by you, then you can live with stability even in the midst of chaos. You will no longer depend on everything going well to feel good, because your well-being will come from within, from what you believe, from what you choose to think. You decide not to allow in your internal dialogue. Do this today. Listen to your mind in a moment of worry. What is it telling you exactly? Write it down. Read it out loud. Ask yourself, is this true? Does this help me? Does this build me or limit me? If it does not serve, change it, rewrite it, repeat it differently, because you are not a slave to your thoughts. You are their architect. And every word you choose to feed is a brick in the mental house you inhabit each day. Do not underestimate the power of a belief. A single one can sustain you or destroy you, but you can also change it. You can choose new ideas that accompany you with strength, not with fear, with clarity, not with anxiety. And when your internal system is based on healthy principles, your mind relaxes. It no longer needs to be on alert all the time, because now it trusts in you, in your process, in your capacity to build from the inside out. And that trust born of new beliefs is what nullifies worry from the root. The seventh step to nullify worries is to redefine your relationship with error, because often the worry that consumes you is not about what is happening now, but about the fear of making a mistake, of not doing it right, of failing and being judged. And when you live with that constant terror of committing errors, your mind enters a state of permanent vigilance. Every decision becomes a source of anxiety. Every step fills with doubt, and you end up paralyzed not by real errors, but by the ghost of what could go wrong. For years, I confused error with failure. Every time something did not go as I wanted, I interpreted it as a sign that I was not enough, that something was wrong with me. And so I demanded more of myself, worried more, prepared more, but not from self-love or excellence. I did it from fear. And that fear made me doubt myself, even when everything was in my favor. Because when you believe you cannot fail, No matter how much you prepare, you will always feel insecure. You will always live in tension, and that tension is exactly what feeds worry. The turn came when I changed a single belief. Error is not the end. It is the path, not the enemy. It is the teacher. I began to see every error not as a stain on my history, but as a necessary step in building my character. Because no one strengthens without stumbling, no one grows without risking, no one reaches true mastery without having failed before. And that truth, though uncomfortable, is profoundly liberating, because it gives you permission to try, to advance, to decide without having to be perfect all the time. I began to ask myself every time I felt worry rising, what would happen if I fail? And what would happen if I succeed? What if that which I so fear happens? Could I learn? Could I adjust? Could I continue? And the answer was always yes, always, because error is part of any brave path. Only he who does nothing does not make mistakes, but he does not live either. And I did not come to this life to avoid failures. I came to build purpose. And that is done step by step, with practice, with awareness, and with errors included. Today I celebrate my errors, not because I desire them, but because I understand them, because every time I fail my mind strengthens, my strategy sharpens, my intuition hones. And that is real progress. That is why I no longer let the fear of error rob my peace. I no longer overthink for days before taking a step. I decide, I act, and if I make a mistake I correct, because I prefer to correct on the path than to live stopped in a bubble of senseless worry. If you today are worried about making a mistake, ask yourself this. What is the worst that can happen if you fail, and what is the best that can happen if you try? That comparison is often enough for your mind to return to balance, because fear always enlarges the negative and minimizes the possible. But when you face it head-on, with logic and bravery, it shrinks, dissolves, loses its power. Error does not define you. Worry does not either. What defines you is how you decide to act despite them, how you choose to keep advancing, how you choose to trust in your capacity to get up. Because every well-utilized error is a dose of wisdom not learned in any book. And when you truly understand that, you stop fearing so much what could go wrong and begin to bet more on what could go right. And their transformation begins, there the noise shuts off, and there you finally breathe in freedom. The 8th step to nullify worries is to strengthen your mental environment. Because no matter how much inner work you do, if you are surrounded by voices that feed fear, complaint, and drama, your mind will return again and again to a state of tension. Worry is not only born from your thoughts, it is also fed by what you consume, by who you talk to, by what you hear every day. And if you are not selective with what you allow into your mental space, you will end up living others' lives, carrying their anxieties, absorbing their limits, worrying about things that were not even yours. It took me time to understand this. I thought I could maintain my internal peace, no matter what happened outside. But it is not so. The mind is porous, permeable, and if you spend the day hearing the world is in crisis, there is no hope. People are bad, nothing works, your nervous system registers it, your body believes it, your internal dialogue adapts to that narrative, and the worst part is you do not even notice. You just feel more tense, more tired, more worried, and you do not know why. But a look at your surroundings is enough to find the answer. I made radical decisions. I stopped watching toxic news. I stopped following accounts that fed fear or comparison. I reduced contact with people who always had a problem, a complaint, a conflict. And yes, at first I felt guilty. It seemed selfish to me. But then I understood that caring for my mental health is not selfishness. It is responsibility, because you cannot serve the world if you are destroyed inside. You cannot create anything valuable if your mind is clouded by others' tension. You cannot live in peace if your environment is designed for the opposite. So I began to choose with intention what books I read, what voices I listen to, what conversations I nurture, what environments I frequent. And over time that external cleansing became an internal protection. I no longer reacted the same to problems. I no longer felt that automatic anxiety that came from living in survival mode, because now my environment did not push me toward worry. It supported me in focus, pushed me toward growth, returned me to calm. And you can do the same. You do not need to cut everything off at once. Just start by observing what external things increase your worry, what stimuli take you out of your center, what relationships drain you mentally. Write them down, And then without guilt begin to set limits to protect your mind as you would protect a child, with firmness, with love, with clarity, because what you let in becomes what you repeat, and what you repeat becomes your mental reality. Environment is not everything, but it is a big part. And if you take your peace seriously, you will also take seriously what you allow around it. Because caring for your environment is a way of telling yourself, my mind is valuable, my energy matters, my peace is non-negotiable. And from there, everything you do gains another strength, because you are no longer rowing against a current of negative stimuli. You are navigating with direction, with cleanliness, with order. When your environment respects you, your mind relaxes. When you choose, well, what you see, what you hear, what you allow, worries decrease on their own because they no longer have food, they no longer have a chorus, they no longer have a stage. They dissolve in the clarity of an environment that pushes upward, not downward. And there, in that protected space, you can build a truly free mind that thinks for itself, that decides with calm, that lives without the world's unnecessary noise, because you learn to filter. And that filter, if you keep it firm, is one of your most powerful weapons against worry. The 9th step to nullify worries is to recover your ability to decide quickly, because many worries are nothing more than decisions not taken. The mind fills with noise when you procrastinate, when you doubt eternally, when you go in circles without daring to close a choice. And that exhausts you because there is nothing more draining than the intermediate ground, that mental place where you are neither on one side nor the other, where you do not advance nor retreat, where everything is on pause, but you keep thinking non-stop. I lived for years trapped in that state. I had ideas, goals, clear opportunities in front of me, but I was paralyzed by the possibility of choosing wrong. I wanted to have all the information, all scenarios, analyzed all guarantees, and while I waited for that perfect clarity, the only thing I achieved was more confusion, more stress, more worry, because the truth is this: clarity does not always come before deciding. Often clarity appears after, when you move, when you choose, when you commit. There I understood that making decisions with determination does not mean being impulsive. It means trusting your judgment, your intuition, your experience. It means accepting that you do not need 100% certainty to advance, because if you wait for that, you will never do anything. You will spend your whole life calculating, planning, or overthinking, while time and opportunities pass before you. I began to apply a simple but powerful rule. If something takes me more than a reasonable time to decide this, and there is no new relevant information, I choose with what I have. I launch, because even if I am wrong, I am in motion, and in motion I have more control, more learning, more possibility to adjust. On the other hand, in indecision, I only have paralysis, only mental noise, only more worry. And here's the key point. A decision made liberates energy, closes mental cycles, more learning, gives you direction, reduces anxiety, allows you to put all your attention on execution, not on doubt, because the most corrosive worry is the one that comes from feeling trapped between options, from not knowing which path to take. But what many do not understand is that what traps you is not life. It is your lack of decision. And you can change that today. Make a list from feeling trapped of the decisions you are postponing, big or small, the ones that spin in your mind each night, and then close them one by one. Choose, accept, act, because deciding is a way of cleaning your mind, of removing mental garbage that accumulates every time you doubt. And when you get used to deciding with firmness, your mind gets used to trusting, to focusing, to stop inventing tragic futures and start building new realities. It is not your intelligence that has you trapped. It is your fear of failing. But that fear is overcome the moment you choose to move despite it, because power is in action, not in doubt. And a mind that moves with action leaves little room for worry, because it no longer needs to imagine. It is no longer needs to imagine. It is no longer needs to imagine. Paralyzed. It is present. It is no longer scattered. It is directed. Learn this. Deciding does not always guarantee the perfect result, but it guarantees growth. And that growth, step by step, takes you farther than 1,000 hours of analysis without execution. Because life does not reward he who thinks the most. It rewards he who dares to act with awareness the most. And you can be that man, The one who chooses with clarity, the one who moves without fear, the one who stops feeding worry and starts feeding his power with a single decision. The one you make today, the one that has been waiting inside you for a long time.